My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. It's time for us to tell our own stories, and I'm here to do just that. Welcome to the Sip My Thoughts podcast, where Black Southern culture resides. Welcome back to the Sip My Thoughts podcast, man. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for telling a friend or putting someone onto the podcast. Really appreciate it. I'm definitely trying to be more consistent about dropping episodes. You know, obviously life happens to everyone, and I don't want to make that an excuse. So I'm trying to press forward and just, create through all the madness that's going on as far as like work and life and things like that are concerned. So y'all definitely gonna be getting more episodes from me. I'm trying to get the digital aspect of this going as well. My computer is kind of old, so I'm trying to figure out a way to, eventually get me a new computer so I can stop having some of the issues that I'm having with my current laptop. So I do have a YouTube channel, and I have 109 subscribers, trying to get to 1,000. So definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel. I have some content on there already. Like I said, I'm going to be more consistent with dropping content. So I'm going to even drop this on YouTube as well. But it's probably be most likely the audio version, and I have probably like some art on top of the audio. But I am going to put this on YouTube as well. So like I said, thank y'all for, continually rocking with me, continually listening to the pod. And, just patronizing it. This is definitely not an easy thing to do. So I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the support. So today I want to talk about the HBCU Renaissance. And HBCUs are currently undergoing a period of rebirth. And I just so happened to look up the word Renaissance, and that's pretty much what it means. It's a rebirth. So that's kind of where I want to start. So I want to go over 3 or 4 points, or maybe even more, just to kind of highlight what HBCUs are experiencing at the moment, and just some of the things that I've noticed over the years that have kind of are coming into fruition as far as, our kids returning back to HBCUs. So let me first start the rebirth. So if you think about any period of time where Black people are advancing throughout the history, they've always started with a leader or a figurehead. You think about Marcus Garvey, for an example. You definitely think about Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party. Those were movements that were sustained by strong Black leadership, and those coming together with a common goal in order to achieve something greater than themselves. So for me, the rebirth of HBCUs and the highlighted attention on HBCUs at this particular point in time, I just think that you have to point to the hiring of Deion Sanders at Jackson State as that rebirth, I would say. So Coach Prime is entering his second full season at the helm of Jackson State University's football program. But along with Coach Prime, you obviously know a lot comes with him as well. I mean, you just got to know that he's a cultural icon, and people are going to naturally gravitate to who Deion Sanders is, who he's all about, and anything that he's involved in, people particularly want to be involved in as well. So you can just look at all the things that Deion has done so far since he's been at Jackson State. I mean, just look at, the kids, the practice field. They now have a new practice field that most HBCUs don't have access to. That's something that Deion has brought. Just speaking specifically to Jackson State at the moment. New locker room. They just recently unveiled a new locker room for the kids. And Deion underwent where he provided some of his own salary, half of his salary, for the job, in order to allow the kids to get everything that they needed and everything that they deserved. And those are his words. So you just look at some of the improvements that's being made at Jackson State, and you just have to attribute that to what Deion Sanders is doing, and just him being selfless and deciding to pour into an HBCU, particularly Jackson State at this particular point in time. Now, let's look outside of Jackson State and look at the heightened attention that HBCUs are getting. Uncle Luke held a Twitter Spaces the other day with Coach Prime and FAMU head football coach Willie Simmons. In there, and this is something that I really appreciate. A lot of people, they see Deion Sanders and they look at him as prime time, because obviously that's the moniker that he's had, since his playing days, even before he got to the NFL. I know he always tells this story about how he was playing in a basketball game and he dropped, I know it was like over 20-something points. And somebody said to him, "Boy, you prime time," or something like that. So it just stuck and kept, and it just stuck with him. One of the things that I really appreciated about Coach Simmons is he just acknowledged what everybody knew. One of the things about our community is, we tend to show disdain maybe when we aren't even particularly trying to, but you can just tell in some of the comments that people make, when they're sneak dissing or when they're saying something that they feel a way about you and who you are as an individual, but they might try to do or say slick things. For example, I saw an Instagram post where somebody said something along the lines of, if someone is referring to anything to you or anything that you're doing as little, so like this podcast, for an example, I'll just throw this out there. I remember my ex-girlfriend, we were communicating even after we broke up. We had a cordial relationship. I'll never forget, she asked me how my little podcast was going. And in my head, I caught it, and then she caught it. She caught what she said, but she was like, "Oh, I didn't mean it like that, so-and-so, so-and-so." But I knew what it was. So I think I wouldn't say people are naturally jealous of Prime, but sometimes, and a perfect example, Lil Boosie for an example, he said sometimes cats are just hypnotized with jealousy. They aren't even able to see that they're sneak dissing or that they're being a hater because it's in them per se. So what I really liked about what Coach Simmons said the other day was that the reason for there being more eyes on HBCU football is because of Deion. And I think you can't keep it any more realer than that. You can't be any more 100 than that. And a lot of men would not get up on a platform like that and be willing to admit that the reason that there is so much attention around HBCUs at this particular point in time is because of Deion Sanders. There are a lot of bloggers out here who love to hate on Deion, who love to say what Deion should be doing, how he should be doing it, what Jackson State should be doing, and just trying to throw a monkey wrench in something that doesn't have anything to do with them. Obviously, he's a public figure, Deion is, so, there's going to be that level of attention and eyes and things like that. But I just thought that was really dope for Coach Simmons to just outright say that, because a lot of black men would not do that. So Deion, when he walked in the door, one of the first things that he said is he's trying to elevate all HBCUs. So while he is the head football coach at Jackson State University, he's also trying to leave it better than he found it. And I think that was super profound, and I think that was super important. So Prime is really reinvigorating HBCU football. Now, how is he reinvigorating HBCU football? As someone who went to a historically black college and university as well, I played college baseball. And I think we all know, anyone who has attended the HBCU, what comes along with attending the HBCU. I mean, there's a lack of access to resources that you don't have to worry about at like Power 5 institutions and things like that. So Deion is coming in. He's paying attention to what's going on. He sees what's not readily available for the kids, and he's just putting his money where his mouth is. And I think that's very important. He's also utilizing his voice in order to speak out on things that do not benefit historically black colleges and universities as well. So he's not just looking at it from an athletic standpoint. He's not just looking at it from just a marketing standpoint. I love that he's taking a holistic approach and view to not only what he's doing at Jackson State, but what he's also trying to instill at historically black colleges and universities. Obviously, you look at the deal between Jackson State University and Tennessee State University. You know, they have that classic every year, and I remember that classic, you know, at least, you know, since I was a child. But if you just look at the business practices that's going along with that classic, you know, Coach Prime is taking a look at it along with the AD, and they just felt that it was not mutually beneficial for Jackson State University. And, you know, we love to say yesterday's price is not today's price, and that is definitely the approach that Deion Sanders is taking when it comes to, you know, trying to reroute and rewrite the type of business practices that's been going on at Jackson State before his tenure and before Ashley Robinson's tenure as AD there as well. So he's changing the game, and that's something that he walked in the door from his first day saying that he wanted to do. He's going to change the game, but changing the game is not only an athletic endeavor, it's a holistic endeavor. Business practices have to change. You know, everything, the whole process about what's been going on at HBCUs needs to change, and Deion is taking a holistic approach and looking at that. Now, you can't just, I would say, credit Coach Prime for everything that's going on in HBCU football. You definitely have to give some credit, I believe, to South Carolina State head coach Buddy Pugh also. He has the most NFL players from South Carolina State, players that have played at South Carolina State. You look at Darius Leonard, you know, guys like that who are now in the NFL. And I forgot the guy that just got recently drafted. His name is escaping me at the moment, but I do know that he's on the LA Rams. Jacoby Durant. His name just came to me. But South Carolina State, they put some pros in the NFL. So while Buddy Pugh is doing it on a much more calm level, you also have to gotta make sure that you acknowledge what he's done as well, and you know, everything that's going into, you know, putting HBCU athletes into the pros. So I think with any movement that you think about in this country, and I'm speaking specifically on black movements, like black liberation movements, you know, just taking care of the community and things like that. Again, you look at Marcus Garvey, and you definitely have to look at the Black Panther Party to see the type of things that's been going on in our community. So it starts with an idea, and then that idea becomes a revolution when you get everyone working together for a common goal in order for something to change, when you want better outcomes. So I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that HBCUs are currently undergoing a rebirth, and that rebirth has been sparked by the hiring of Deion Sanders at Jackson State University. So that's point number one. So let's talk about point number two. And point number two, I titled, what sparked black athletes returning to HBCUs? I feel over the last 10 years or so, I know this conversation has not been as prevalent, but I definitely recall around the times when unarmed black men were being killed by police. I remember working a job my first journalism job on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. There was a parent that I was following on Facebook, and I was following him because he lived in the community that I covered. And, you know, my job is just to become more entrenched in the community, learn more about, you know, what the people in the community want to know about as far as like government things and stuff like that was concerned, because that was my beat. I just never forget. I'm not sure, but someone was killed around that time. It might have been Sean Bell. And there was a whole thing about, you know, black athletes returning to HBCUs and, you know, stop going to PWIs or predominantly white institutions, instead of building up their communities, well, not communities, but their athletics, and, you know, just creating more of an athletic lore for their particular community, and return home to HBCUs and start doing that for our community. I'll never forget this. This is a black parent that I vividly remember this. He was saying that he would never send his son to a HBCU if he played sports, because there was a high probability that his child would not get drafted out of said HBCU. And at that particular point in time, that it wasn't like a lie or anything like that, or something that you could point to and say that, well, that's not accurate, because at the time, HBCUs, and even still today, HBCUs are trying to get footing in order to, some of them anyway, just to remain afloat. But when you talk about athletic budgets and things along those lines, and putting guys into the pros and in the league and stuff like that, you can understand any parent's hesitation initially to wanting to send their child to a historically black college or university for that specific feat. However, HBCUs are so much more layered than, our athletic pursuits or our athletic endeavors. You want your child to become a more cultured individual. You want your child to become a more cultured human being. When you send your child out in the world, just speaking personally, after leaving a historically black college and university, I was more aware of what I would be facing when I walked outside of those gates. A lot of HBCUs, there's a level of comfort because the people that you encounter every day mostly look like you. There are multicultural students who attend HBCUs as well, and there are white people that attend HBCUs as well. But the goal of all HBCUs, I would say, is to provide you with that safe haven, but also prepare you for what you're going to walk into when you walk into the professional world. I'm not white, obviously, but I feel like a white student who attends an HBCU, I feel like once they leave outside of those gates, they are more cultured, and they have I would assume that they would have a better understanding of, okay, this is my privilege. I don't experience the same things that my fellow man might experience, but it's my job to go out in the world and make sure that I contribute to the betterment of helping everyone, get a step up. Like, I already have this particular step up in life, so it's my job and it's my responsibility in order to give someone else a leg up and help them up along the way. So I would assume and I would hope that is what white students who attend HBCUs are taking away from their experience at a HBCU. With that being said, just going back to the athletic side of it, HBCUs, I mean, of course, sports is a big part of life. Sports is a big part of what we do. But when it comes to taking a stance, like I said, everything starts with a point person or a revolution. And I really feel like, obviously, it's unfortunate of unarmed black people being killed by police and things like that. But I know personally, I was starting to see those conversations, when the deaths of like Michael Brown was occurred, Sean Bell. Unfortunately, the list goes on and on. So yeah, I know that was a really big time where people were really calling for us to return to our HBCUs. Now, although that didn't occur, now I feel like we are in a different place to where you have to take a closer look at what's available to you, and everything that comes along with the HBCU experience. Obviously, you want to play sports, and who doesn't want to play professionally if you've honed your craft enough to where you can see yourself being in that particular place and time. But I could also understand during that time why parents who felt like that would say that they wouldn't want to send their child to a HBCU. But there have been movies that have been created along the way, and obviously you look at a movie and you might think that it's not based on true stories, and obviously they'll tell you that before the movie even comes on. But when you look at black art that's been created by like Spike Lee, for an example, School Days, there is a very poignant scene at the very end of the movie of School Days, and I might be dating myself a little bit, but School Days was out way before. School Days was out way before I was born, so I'm not dating myself. But anyway, there is a very powerful scene at the end of the movie, and Lawrence Fishburne is in his bed, and he's asleep, and an alarm clock goes off, and he eventually walks out. He walks out to like a huge corridor, I guess I would say. But basically, like the place, like if you go to HBCU, like you know the place where people gather at, you know where it's lit at, where everything is going down at. So in school days, Lawrence Fishburne, he kept saying, "Wake up, wake up," and he was out there by himself. And then the guys that he was beefing with, whether fraternities and things like that, he wasn't in a fraternity, but he had his friend who was Spike Lee in the movie was pledging. So all of the guys, you know, they were beefing, but at the very end of the movie, after the movie climax, it gets to a point to where he goes out and he's in his corridor by himself and he's just yelling, "Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up." And it gets louder and louder gradually. And then the students start walking out of the dorms. Everyone gathers together. And in a very intimate moment at the very end of the scene, he looks into the camera and he says, "Wake up." And I just thought that was so powerful, because if you really look at what's going on today, there's been so many injustices, so many things that have occurred, but for some reason we refuse to return home. Now, if you look at Deion Sanders now being at the helm at JSU, you have guys transferring in from everywhere. And these guys are transferring in from Power 5 universities, like Mizzou, for an example. You got a guy from Duke who transferred. There's a new wide receiver on the team from Nebraska who's transferred in. You got guys who transferred in from South Carolina. Even his own son, Shiloh Sanders, transferred in from South Carolina. You had guys who had offers to play at Power 5 institutions, but they decided to roll with Coach Prime and change the game at a historically black college or university. One of the things that's really important about a guy like Coach Prime is he's been at the highest level of the sport. He's a cultural icon, right? So for guys who are coming up behind him, you know, obviously his players and things like that, who better than to teach the game of football to, other than the greatest cornerback in the history of the league? Arguably, some people would say, but a lot of people think that Coach Prime is the greatest cornerback to ever play the game of football. So if you're a guy who is playing cornerback in high school, how could you have the audacity? Now, this is just my mind thinking. How could you have the audacity to get an offer from the greatest and you spurn it for a school just because the locker rooms look cooler, or you know, all of the amenities that comes along with it? I was watching, I saw something on Twitter the other day. The University of Florida just unveiled its new practice facility for their football program. And you just see the guys running into the facility with their cameras and everything, you know, showing off the facilities and things like that. And I'm just thinking, we are just excited by the most trivial things. Now, who don't want nice things? So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, you know, you shouldn't want nice things and you shouldn't want a nice locker room, things like that. I am definitely not saying that at all. But I would love to know who the DB coach is at the University of Florida. If he's not Deion Sanders, then you would be hard pressed. Me personally, if I'm growing up today, if I got an offer from the GOAT in my position and I play that position, there's no way that I would be super excited about a really souped up locker room that has a sauna and, you know, just the biggest and best everything. I want the knowledge. I want the tutelage. I want to know, how can I perfect my craft? How can I be the best in my position? And here's the other thing, not to belabor or not to talk down on whoever those coaches might be, or some of these coaches at these Power 5 institutions, but who's done it at the highest level, also business wise, from a from that perspective. None of these other coaches at these institutions can really tell you about what it's like to be at the highest level of their sport, to be the greatest of all time at their particular position, and is business savvy, knows that it's about relationships, and which is something that he's also enacted with getting the new practice field at Jackson State, or getting, other opportunities. You have people who are trying to give money to Jackson State now as well. He's levying relationships. So how do you get this information, or how do you know that this information is available to you and you don't go and take advantage of it just because, you're so excited by the bells and whistles? I think we're so excited by that, but I'm saying all this to say also, when it comes to movements and revolutions and things like that, everyone who looks like you isn't always on board. Everyone who looks like you might, want to throw a monkey wrench in those plans because they want the instant gratification instead of working for what's there and what's not readily available. But what is readily available is the knowledge, is the tutelage, is to be able to be with the best every single day and take advantage of that every single day. But here's why some of that is, I believe. Honestly, I think that there are parents who are living vicariously through their children. So they don't want their children to go to a Jackson State. They don't want their children to go to a FAMU. They don't want their children to go to a South Carolina State University. Kobe Durant had a really interesting story. I believe I heard him say, coming out of high school, he didn't really have any offers like that. He eventually, stumbled upon South Carolina State. He walked in and he did not have a scholarship initially when he started, but he eventually earned that scholarship. He put his head down and he went to work. And Kobe Durant is now a Los Angeles Ram, who's now about to be learning from one of the best, or probably the best cornerback in the league right now, Jalen Ramsey. Now, the thing about HBCUs is that there is a mentality where we have to get it out the mud. And you don't obviously want that to always be the mentality, but that type of mentality breeds character. It breeds callousness. It allows you to know that nothing will be easy, and everything that you get in this life, you will have to work for. So how could you not want your child to experience it? You want your child, and I'm speaking to those parents who are living through their children, you want your child to go through 3 years with Nick Saban or Dabo Swinney or Kirby Smart. And although the league is not guaranteed, it's definitely a higher probability that your child will be in the NFL if they go to those 3 locations. But what about community building? When is community building going to become important to us? Why is it not already important to us? We are sending our children to build these institutions, and like I'm not going to mention this kid's name, but there was a guy, really big recruit in the state of Alabama, and he just recently chose Clemson. And one of the things that I heard him say, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along the lines of Dabo Swinney is a people's person and he's a coach and things like that. But as a parent, and I'm not saying his parent, I'm sure his parents allow him to make his own decision, but as a parent, your job is to also, instill culture into your child. Your parent is, as a parent, and this is just me, I'm not a parent yet, but if there are things happening in this world that historically affects people that look like you, and then you have a coach that comes out and when he speaks about these things, I'm gonna just say he sounds dumb. He has no information about what's going on. He's reluctant to even talk about some of these things, in the media, which is his job, because you have majority black players in your locker room, and then you're just tone deaf to the issues. When it comes to NIL, for an example, he has an issue with NIL. He has an issue with students making money. Most black and brown children, we can't just put that stereotype and say all come from adverse situations. Personally, I grew up in a 2-parent home. So, that's not my situation, but it is a lot of our situations. So if there is an opportunity for them to make money via NIL, how could you as a coach of that university go on, nationally syndicated, radio stations and television programs and just explain your disgust with NIL and the amount of money that a kid is making, and you're one of the highest paid employees in the state? How hypocritical are you? How tone deaf you are? But as a parent, it's your job to expose this to your child. If you knew that your child was looking at possibly going to this university, it's your job as a parent to show him these things. So I was baffled when I saw the child sit up there and say that Dabo Swinney was a people's person, and he was just speaking so glowingly about him. And again, I'm not saying anything about the way that the parents raised the child, but you've seen examples of him be tone deaf. You've seen examples of him not want his white quarterback, in order to sit down and have a meeting with his teammates and talk about these things. And he was reluctant for them to even do that. So you're sending your black child there. Do you not care about the cultivation of who he is as a young man and who he can possibly be? The thing about sports is that sports is fickle. At any given time, you can suffer a huge injury that can really keep you from playing sports ever again. So if that is the case, what does a child have to fall back on? Me personally, I can't honestly say that I would want my child to learn anything from Dabo Swinney, because from what he's shown me is he cares about my black body when I'm running out of the tunnel for him. But outside of that athletic field, outside of the football stadium, how much does he really care about me as a young man? How much does he care about cultivating me, and the person that I could possibly be, as an individual? And, let's say I don't go pro. I'm going to enter into society at some point. Can you honestly say that Dabo Swinney is going to prepare your black child for what's out there and what he's going to experience on the football field? Yeah. But from what he's shown as far as life is concerned, he is not any good at that. He's tone deaf. He refuses. He has, I forgot what they call it, rainbow colored glasses or whatever. He refuses to see injustice. He refuses to see inequity. He refuses to see inequality. So you're sending your black child to someone like that instead of a guy like Buddy Pugh, instead of a guy like Willie Simmons, instead of a guy like Eddie George, instead of a guy like Deion Sanders. These are guys who's done it at the highest level. I'm not sure Coach Simmons did, so excuse me for that, or Coach Pugh, for example. But as far as good men, good quality black men, how could you not want to send your black child to any of these men? So, again, everyone isn't going to be along with the movement. And it's unfortunate that there are parents who don't see the inequality and don't see the detriment in sending their children to these institutions without giving them a heads up on who this person is, the things that he said, how he's portrayed himself, and is this something that I actually want my child, is this someone that I actually want my child to be learning from? So I think that's the unfortunate part here also, that we don't talk enough about, but there are parents who are willingly, pimping their kids out because they want their child to make millions of dollars, and then, they are going to receive a trickle-down effect from that. So I think that's super unfortunate as well, but the unfortunate part about that is, well, I don't think it's unfortunate per se. You can't expect everyone to think the same, and you can't expect everyone to think alike. But, selling your soul for any amount of money it isn't a good thing, I don't think. I mean, obviously the Bible tells you what allows a man to gain the world, but then he loses his whole soul in the process. So just me being me, I think some of these black parents are pimping their kids out, sending them to these universities and sending them to white men like Dabo Swinney, who is completely tone deaf and doesn't really care more about issues that black men in general, but young black athletes, black people in general, I'll just say that, black people, the issues that black people in general face in this country today and in the world. So that's just a part of it, unfortunately. And everyone isn't going to be on board. Everyone isn't going to want to walk in lockstep. But I really applaud the parents who really allow their children and really give their children game. Allow their children to know that, you know, this is bigger than just money. The impact that Coach Prime is having at Jackson State University, all these guys are not going to go pro. A good percentage of them are. I really believe that. However, for those who don't, can you just imagine how much stronger black men they're going to be for their communities? And even the white guys is on the team as well. They get to see a different outlook. They get to see a different perspective. They get to learn from Coach Prime. They get to glean more off of him and learn more about, you know, who they can be in their communities and how they can help, you know, not turn a blind eye to injustice. And when they see something happening to their fellow man, to speak out about it and hopefully uplift also. So I just think with head coaches like Coach Prime, Eddie George, Buddy Pugh, and Coach Simmons, man, and I'm not really as familiar with the other coaches in the SWAC, Coach Dooley also, but I do believe that these are great men, and these are the type of men that you should want your children around, and that, you know, you should want your children to learn from. You know, if you're good, they'll find you. I've always been told that, even playing baseball, it doesn't really matter where you go to school at. If you're good, they will find you. So I just wish more parents would look more deeply into that and really look into that, but it's probably not going to happen. Like I said, everyone isn't going to join the movement. And that's, like I said, again, just looking at the examples that I gave earlier in the pod, looking over any movement that our country have had. I mean, I didn't even mention Harriet Tubman, but there's been stories of, you know, people not want to run away from the plantation because they were comfortable. You know, they were comfortable with what was going on, what was happening, but, you know, they were scared to venture out because of what they could not see. This HBCU Renaissance is about a vision. Things are slowly coming together at this particular point in time, but if Coach Prime is, let's say he's at Jackson State for 10 years, I can only imagine the type of landscape that HBCUs will now re-enter, the conversations that they will re-enter, the media deals that will come their way, more NIL money for the student athletes also. So it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. But the longevity, just the things that he's done so far in his sprint, it's you'll be hard pressed not to say that Deion Sanders has reinvigorated HBCU football. So that's point 2. What sparked black athletes returning to HBCUs? Now let's speak on another transcendent individual who made this decision to join Deion Sanders. And I think we just have to talk about Travis Hunter. And again, I think this speaks to who his parents are also. Travis Hunter had an offer from every school you could think of in the country, and he was committed to Florida State for the longest. But he wanted to learn a little bit more about Deion Sanders. Yeah, he knew about Coach Prime just based on his parents and who his parents were. So the parents introduced Travis to Coach Prime as a youngin. So Coach Prime becomes a head coach at Jackson State University. Travis is obviously intrigued because he came to the All-Court game last year. Now, you didn't really know who really in their right mind thought that the number one player in the country would be in Jackson, Mississippi, playing for Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, prime time. But he made that decision earlier this year, and he is set to make his college debut September 4th. And I think it was Miami Gardens in Miami for the FAMU game. But Travis Hunter is going to be remembered favorably once his time at Jackson State is done. Travis Hunter is going to go down as an icon. If he puts up the type of numbers that people are expecting, and I'm fully knowing that he's probably going to exceed those expectations, but if he puts up what people thinks he does, he goes and he gets drafted highly into the NFL, I honestly believe that there's going to be a wave of top recruits considering historically black colleges and universities, not just for clickbait on their social media and things like that. Obviously, you know, this is a really dope time in these kids' lives where they get a chance to, you know, put out like their rankings for who their top schools are and things like that. So it's an honor for Jackson State to now be in these conversations. But for a kid to actually act on it, the number one kid in the country also, I just think that you can't beat that. And if he goes out and he's as dominant as we feel that he's going to be, I think there's going to be more of this happening. But here's something that I also want to touch on also. With the number one player entering into Jackson State, my concern isn't about what he's going to learn, who he's going to become after his 3 years are up or anything. I think what I'm trying to say is with great risk, there can be great reward. But I think that we have to look at this from a bunch of different perspectives. Travis Hunter is at Jackson State University because Coach Prime is someone he looks to as an icon. He looks to as a mentor. He looks to as a figurehead of who he wants to be in his professional career and who he wants to be in life also. So that is why he's at Jackson State University, and I don't want to make any mistake about that. But I think for me personally, I just think about these NIL deals and things like that he signed. And I know that his parents are very integral in the NIL deals and things like that. But I think this is something, Travis Hunter is someone that, not Jackson State University. So I'm not speaking about Jackson State University. Travis Hunter is someone, obviously his story is still being written. So if he has as legendary of a career as I believe he will also be a cultural icon. Not sure it's in the same vein as Coach Prime, because Coach Prime did it without social media. But now this is an era where social media is so prevalent, and it's, you know, people are watching. All eyes are watching. And when I say all eyes are watching, that means everyone, not just the black audience, not just the HBCU audience. There are people who are unhappy with Travis Hunter choosing Jackson State over Florida State. I remember there was a Twitter Spaces that was held with Florida State fans, and they wanted the coach fired because Travis decided on Jackson State over Florida State. And that should tell you something in itself. Everyone is not happy that Travis Hunter spurned Florida State for Jackson State University. And I say everyone, that means everyone. Even the black folks who are under the guise that Power 5 institutions, water is colder than the water that you get at HBCUs. You also have to look at the audience. You also have to look at the white audience who feels like, and the donors, and, you know, just Power 5s in general. Travis Hunter choosing Jackson State is seismic. And I think people understand that, but I'm not sure if they understand it to the degree of what it actually is. So when I say all eyes are on not only just Jackson State, they're on Travis Hunter as well. Travis Hunter is bringing a lot of eyes and a lot of viewership to Jackson State football, you know, when the season and stuff kicks off in about 2 weeks. So with that being said, the culture has to be careful of how we treat and deal with Travis Hunter. Who is the culture? Black folks. So Travis recently signed an NIL deal with Greenwood, which is a bank founded by Killer Mike and another individual. Can't think his name is escaping me at the moment. But Travis has made it a point to where he wants to be involved with black business owners as far as elevating their stock and elevating their brands as well, along with his. His whole thing about Jackson State University, in my opinion, yes, he's at Jackson State University because of what Deion Sanders means to him, but he also wants to make it a point of elevating black culture as well, which means black businesses that he's partnered with. And like I said, Greenwood, with who he just recently partnered with, their initiative is trying to get more black people to bank black, put their money in black banks in order so we can build our economic viability and sustainability for, a lot of the things that this country continues to keep us out of. Black people have the hardest time when it comes to securing a home loan for home ownership. Those are just one thing. That's just one thing. Obviously, you can talk about police interactions as well, which I mentioned earlier. But one of the things that our community really struggles with is economic viability and sustainability. You could just look at the conversation centered around Coach Prime being at an HBCU. You just had him hire former Minnesota Vikings head coach Mike Zimmer to his staff. One of the things Mike Zimmer, and obviously he was joking, but we know that it's the truth also, he said the money stinks. The money that he's going to be paid from Jackson State for being a defensive analyst. Coach Zimmer said the money stinks. We know that he's being truthful, but we also know that he's still getting a check from the Minnesota Vikings as well. So that just goes without saying. But when you look at things like these, all eyes, like Jackson State has a saying, like all eyes on thee. We have to be careful and mindful of how we treat Travis Hunter. We must do right by Travis Hunter. And when I say we, I'm meaning the culture. I'm not talking about Jackson State University, because obviously Coach Prime is going to make sure that everything is handled correctly for not only just Travis, but all of his players. But Travis is the number one player in the country, so that comes with a different level of responsibility. When I say all eyes are on us, that means all eyes, every eyeball any eyeball that you can think of, any eyeball that you can imagine is on what's going on at Jackson State and Travis Hunter. We as a culture have to make sure that whatever his NIL deal is, whatever, if let's say he does a podcast or something like that, we have to make sure that we treat him with, I'm not saying treat him better than any other player. I'm just saying that this is a number one. This has never been done as long as rankings have been done. I just want to make that extremely clear. I'm not just making this about Travis Hunter per se, but I think when you listen to this, you'll understand the viability of what I'm saying as far as how important it is for the culture to do right by him, how important it is for Killer Mike and the Greenwood Initiative to do right by him, how important it is for any black-owned business who is trying to provide an NIL deal to Travis Hunter. It is important for us to do right by him. He made a decision that's going to change the landscape of college football, possibly in a wave to where our kids will start coming back to our universities at an extremely high clip. You might not ever, you'll never unseat Alabama. You'll never unseat Clemson. You'll never unseat Ohio State. But if you're just paying attention to the landscape of what's going on, guys are transferring in to HBCUs from Power Fives. Guys are seeing the economic viability that is starting to kind of trickle down into these HBCUs now. You have Eddie George at Tennessee State, who's done an amazing job at recruiting. FAMU is getting top recruits. South Carolina State is getting top recruits. Southern University is getting top recruits. Grambling is getting top recruits. The landscape of college football is changing. The SWAC, there's no hotter conference in college football right now than the SWAC. But we have to make sure that we do right by these kids. It is extremely important. Travis Hunter is absolutely the epicenter of what we should be doing as far as making sure that you treat him the way that he should be treated, just simply based on, again, him choosing Jackson State is the biggest move in college football history at this particular point in time. Work. It must work. It has to work. So we need to be very careful. We need to be very mindful of how we not only treat Travis Hunter, but the way that the culture treats Travis Hunter. I just can't understate that enough. So Travis is point 3, and really the NFL, the ramifications of the NIL and what it could do for college football, just based on the move that Travis made. I just think that it's super important. And as long as we do right by our kids and by our children, I think we'll be okay. So I think the last point that I'll speak on, I guess I'll just call it expectations. I remember when Deion Sanders to Jackson State was simply a rumor and it had not been acted upon at this particular point in time. So fast forward, Coach Prime is the head coach of Jackson State. Things have obviously changed. If you see me on Twitter talking about anything, and if it seems like I'm passionate about it, it's because I'm from Jackson, Mississippi, born and raised. I did not go to Jackson State, but I grew up literally 10 minutes away from Jackson State. I went to Tougaloo, which is about 20 minutes from Jackson State, depending on interstate traffic. But anything that's going on in Jackson, Mississippi is important to me. You look at Mississippi and the bad rap that we get, what outsiders or people outside of Mississippi think about Mississippi, and just everything that is been portrayed to be by movies. You look at Mississippi Burning, all those type of movies and stuff like that. There are people who still think that about Mississippi in general. But I'm from the capital, which is one of the blackest cities in the country. So anything that happens in my city, I'm extremely passionate about, and I want the best for it. With Coach Prime coming in, expectations for everyone in the city of Jackson went up. So I'm glad to hear that there's been nothing going on as far as anything that's happening with the players or anything like that. Crime is everywhere. Crime is something that you cannot escape, but it's something that you don't want to just continue to harp on and continue to make a big deal about. But with great reward comes great responsibility. Deion Sanders being in Jackson, Mississippi is great reward, great responsibility. Everyone in the city has to raise their level. And obviously y'all not athletes and stuff like that, so I get it. But everyone has to be on their P's and Q's. Everyone has a responsibility to Jackson State University. Everyone in the city has a responsibility to Jackson State University. Everyone needs to raise their profile. Everyone needs to raise their level. HBCUs are on the way back up. It's a renaissance. It's a rebirth. It's a movement. One of the favorite things that I learned while I was in school, we learned about the Harlem Renaissance. And the Harlem Renaissance, for those who might not be familiar, the Harlem Renaissance was basically a period where black folks were just at their peak. arts, culture, everything was just the expectation level raised. Louis Armstrong, just everything about the Harlem Renaissance. I loved it. It's just a period where black folks just really came into their own. HBCUs are now in a period to where we are starting to recognize who we are, what we're capable of, what we bring to the table. We also look at it from the perspective of yesterday's price is not today's price. So when you say that, we love to say that, but now there has to be some action put behind that. One of the things that Coach Simmons said on the Twitter Spaces the other day was that let the athletic director raise ticket prices. He said you would think Armageddon is coming, but we love to say yesterday's price is not today's price. Deion Sanders is the figurehead of this movement. Again, it was cool to see Coach Simmons acknowledge that and acknowledge the amount of attention that he's brought to all HBCUs. Now that we know that, it is everyone's responsibility to play their part. So if your athletic director raises ticket prices, buy the tickets. Does not matter by how much. Buy the tickets. You now have a responsibility as a fan base. You have a responsibility to make this environment more viable for our kids. That is your responsibility. All fan bases. When the season starts in 2 weeks, obviously we're not going to fill up an NFL stadium, but it damn near needs to be close. That is your responsibility. And it's not just the people it's not just the responsibility of people and just the fan bases per se. If you black and you in Miami and you don't have a team, go to the game. It is your responsibility. We want our kids to return home. We got to give them something to return home to. It is our responsibility to create the environment that they see, that they know they can thrive in, they can be viable in, and they can possibly lead them to an NFL job, whether they coach or whether they play, whether it leads to an internship, whether it leads to anything viable for them. With this new HBCU renaissance, it is everyone's job to raise the profile. Everyone. I have a responsibility. You have a responsibility. Everyone has a responsibility to these kids. You want them to return home? Come to the game. Pack the games out. When the games are broadcast on television, don't need to be a lot of empty seats in there. The stadium needs to be packed. The stadium needs to be full. We have a responsibility now. We've been talking about tradition. For so long, our HBCUs have been doing things one way. How has that worked out for us? How much have we progressed? There's something on Twitter that I've seen. We see is Jackson State this, Jackson State that, right? Coach Prime is not only challenging the Jackson State fan base, he is also challenging FAMU's fan base, Southern's fan base, Grambling's fan base, Prairie View's fan base, Valley's fan base. Everyone has a responsibility, which is why I said the culture. It is the culture's responsibility to make sure that these kids have something to come home to. Give more to your HBCUs and stop giving money to these designer brands who don't give two rats booty about you. That money you spending on Gucci, Louis, Prada, Montclair, most of that crap is ugly anyway, just being honest with y'all. But that money that you giving to them, give to your HBCU or give to a HBCU. If this reaches your ears and you have no affiliation to a HBCU whatsoever, if you can spend money, I'm not trying to tell you how to spend your money per se, but if you can spend your money on stuff like that, invest in a young black man's future. You can do that with an HBCU. So stop just giving your money away to trivial stuff. You know, I just look at all these comments on Coach Prime's, IG page. This the culture. This and that. You making it fun. This and that. All right. All that's well and good. Open them pockets up. Open them checkbooks up. Give some of that money away in order to help these kids, make the SWAC what it used to be. We like to poo-poo and crap on HBCU football, the competition and things like that. But you forget guys like Deacon Jones, One of the fiercest competitors in the NFL came from HBCU. One of the greatest running backs of all time, Walter Payton, came from Jackson State University. One of the greatest, or possibly the greatest wide receiver of all time, came from Itta, Mississippi, at Mississippi Valley State University. These institutions can be what they once were, but everyone has to realize there is an expectation. As Coach Prime said before, there is an expectation that when you do something, you expect to receive results from it, right? We now have an expectation in this HBCU space to uplift and elevate the playing field. It's not just a Coach Prime job. It's not just a Deion Sanders job. It is everyone's job who is a part of the culture, whether you went to an HBCU or not. If you say you're in the culture, you're a part of the culture, you need to act like it. You need to provide funds like it. You need to give like it. You need to uplift like it. I'm not gonna tell another blogger what they should say or what they should do, because there are room for shock jock bloggers and stuff like that. There's definitely room for them. There's room for them, but the voices of shock jock bloggers should not supersede the voices of people who's on the ground, who's given, who's been in the trenches, who knows what it's like or knows what HBCUs have been like before, you decided to put your foot in the water because Deion Sanders became the head coach at Jackson State University. So let's stop giving light to these shock jock bloggers and give light to those who've been in the trenches. There's an expectation that HBCUs can be what we once were. We're not trying to compare ourselves to anybody else, but we know that these Power 5 institutions are what they are because our black bodies have been there elevating those programs to the level of prominence that they are experiencing today. If we want our athletes to return to our institutions, we have to give them something to return home to. This has been another episode of the Sip My Thoughts podcast. Please check me out on all social media platforms at Sip My Thoughts. Podcast page on Instagram is the Sip My Thoughts Pod. YouTube, Sip My Thoughts. Twitter, Sip My Thoughts. Facebook, Sip My Thoughts. This is also a podcast, so definitely check me out on all of your streaming platforms. Apple Pods, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play or Google Podcasts, whatever it is. If you're overseas, international, Ghana, Gaana. I'm on all of these platforms. The culture is ours. The culture has always been ours. We just need to change how we react and change how we treat the culture. Again, this has been another episode of the Sip My Thoughts podcast. Welcome to the HBCU Renaissance. Peace.